video was created several years ago using a previous version of Visual Studio. The differences to the current version of Visual Studio are primarily cosmetic, most notably the older window styles, and everything discussed applies to today's working environment. As time permits, I will redevelop this video so it's current with the most recent version of Visual Studio. The next control we're going to look at is a label control. Now it is very similar to the text box control. We create a label the same way as we do a text box. I can drag the label over. I can select the label tool and simply click in the text box. Or I can select the label tool and draw a box for that label. Now when I let go of this label, you're going to notice it constricts to a very small size. It was not the size that I drew it at. And that is because of a property for the labels by default, which is the AutoSIze property set to true. I'm going to change that and set it to false. And you'll notice my label now becomes much bigger. So the AutoSIze property allows the label to expand and contract based on the contents of that label. A lot of times I like to set the label to a specific size. So I set that to false in most cases. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. We can drag the handle and change the size. So it has a size property. So I'm going to bring the size property up here. Notice that as I drag this handle and let go, the numbers of that size property change. So I can change the size by dragging visually, or I could come in and type a new size in the property window. Like text boxes, there is a text property. I can type text into the text property. There's also a little drop-down icon here where I can get a larger area to type into. So I might type in some instructions of watch this video very carefully. And if I come back and click on the text property, it will apply that text to my label. Now, we had a word wrap and a multi-line property in the text box. We don't have those in the label. It automatically wraps and automatically does multi-line based on the contents and the size of that label. The difference between a text box and a label largely is one where the text box is dynamic text. So the value of the text property might change by the user. Usually we'll use the text box for gathering input from a user. They can type into a text box. The user cannot type into a label. It is, in essence, read-only by default. There are ways to make labels and text boxes look very similar and behave similarly, and both are used for output often, but for input we'd have to use a text box. So the text for a label is static. We can change it in code, but the user cannot change the text. Like a text box, the label has a TextAlign property. It's a little bit different in that rather than just having left, center, or right, I actually have 9 different locations as to where I can have this text in the label appear. So I have a top left, and there's a corresponding top right and a top center. Here's a middle center. So I'm going to click that, and now my text is centered in that text box, both vertically and horizontally. So I can change the text align based on how I want to label items or how I want the text to appear within this box. Now speaking of the box, there's also a BorderStyle property, just like the text box had. And my choices again are none, fixed single, and fixed 3D. So I might choose fixed single to get a actual physical drawn border around my label. I can change the back color, just as I did with the text box. I can change the ForeColor, which is going to control the color of the text itself. And I can change the font. I'm just going to make the font here larger and maybe make it bold. As with the text box, we have the name property, up at the top. By default, it's going to be named Label 1, Label 2, Label 3, and so forth, based on the order in which the labels are created. If I were to name this label, I would start with the letters LBL, which is the Hungarian notation for a label. So I might name this one LBL Instructions. Now, a lot of times I'm not naming labels because I don't refer to them in code. But if we're going to use this for output and maybe change the text that was in this label, we probably would be referring to it in code, and therefore I want to change the name to something meaningful. LBL Instructions, in this case, might be a good choice. I'm going to create a second label. One of the unique properties of a label is the ability to add an image. There's an image property. I'm going to click the button with the 3 ellipses, which will bring up a dialog box. In this dialog box, I can select a resource. I'm going to choose a local resource off my hard drive. Click Import and go find an image. I'm going to choose the image of this dog and click OK. And it now appears inside my label. I'm going to delete the text out of that label. And then I'm going to set the AutoSIze, because now the label is contracted based on the text. I'm going to set the AutoSIze property to false, and I can change the dimensions of my label. The image at this point is centered in the middle, and that is based on the ImageAlign property. So I could choose to have this image in the upper left. I might choose to have it in the top. And then I could go back to my text, type in some text. I'm going to add a label of dog, and I want that maybe to be underneath the picture. I could put it in the bottom center. And again, I can resize my label. So now I've included both an image and some text in that label control. And then, like the text box, the label control also has a visible property. So I can select a label and set the visible to false. And when I run the application, that label will disappear. In code, we may want to turn the visibility of controls on or off. But initially, we may want to have a control hidden. And so I would do that here in the Properties window by setting the visible property to false.